Muncitorul viteaz pomenește povestea orașului pustiu. As many language enthusiasts probably know, Romanian is the only major language spoken in Eastern Europe that belongs to the Romance linguistic family, an Indo-European branch that has its roots in Latin. Yet, the Romanian sentence presented here contains no Latin-derived words at all. In fact, most of these words are Slavic in origin, while two of them come from Hungarian. My non-Latin word choice here is of course intentional. It seemed like an interesting starting point to dive into the question, how Latin is Romanian? Which is a crude simplification of a set of questions like, in what ways does Romanian resemble the vulgar Latin of the Roman Empire? How does Romanian relate to other Romance languages in terms of vocabulary, syntax, and grammar, etc.? Is it really such an outlier? I probably won't answer all of that, but those are the types of questions I'm about to discuss. Let's get started. Looking at any random written text in present-day Romanian, one that is not intentionally constructed to omit Latin words like I just did, the Romance character is often impossible to miss. And as a general rule, the more formal the text, the more Latin it is. Especially official documents and legislation, like the first 3 paragraphs of Article 1 of the Romanian Constitution shown here, are composed in a kind of pure ultra-Romance, the type of language one might imagine in an alternate universe where the Roman Empire never fell. There is not a single word here that does not come directly or indirectly from Latin, although perhaps 1 or 2 might ultimately have other origins. If you understand any other Romance languages, or even just English, which has an enormous amount of Romance vocabulary, it might be relatively easy for you to understand part of what is written here. Only when reading until the 4th paragraph, one bumps into a Slavic word, the only one in the entire article. However, the number of Latin-derived words quickly decreases if one looks at Romanian used in other contexts, like fiction literature, movie subtitles, and especially the spoken language. And official Romanian has not always had a pure Romance appearance either. In fact, with the rise of modern nationalism in the 19th century, when Romanian intellectuals living in the Ottoman and Habsburg empires started reappreciating the nation's Latin identity and Roman heritage, an etymological dictionary came out which showed that around 40% of the Romanian lexicon of that time came from Slavic, 20% from Turkish, and only about the same percentage, 20%, from Latin. Important here is to note the early Slavic migration into southeastern Europe and the fact that Old Church Slavonic, that is, Old Bulgarian, used to be both the liturgical and administrative language during the Middle Ages, 2 key factors in this statistic. As literacy was rising in the 1800s and attempts were made at standardizing the language into a modern written form, linguists, poets, writers and politicians of the nascent Romanian state started the process of language reform, directed towards what could be called re-latinization. It is of course true that during that century, most European languages gained large amounts of Latin, Greek and French-derived words related to science, technology and politics. But Romanian linguistic innovators went further than their colleagues in other countries, because they made a very conscious and consistent effort of replacing words of non-Latin origin for loanwords or reconstructed words with Romance roots. Some directly from Latin, some from Italian, but the vast majority of them from French. They also gradually got rid of the Cyrillic alphabet, previously used to write the language, in favor of the Latin characters that are still in use today. And for some years even, they used a unique and interesting mixed Cyrillic-Latin script. Here is but a very small sample of Romanian words derived from French. Municipiu, magazin, adresă, cabinet, șosete, știință, elev, coșmar. The linguistic Latinization process did not happen overnight. It took many decades until some borrowed or reconstructed Romance words made their way into the mainstream and took the place of older non-Romance forms. To give an example, until World War II, and even shortly after that, into the early Romanian communist days, war monuments might still contain texts along the lines of Slava veșnică neamului biruitor, where the first two words are from Slavic and the second two from Hungarian, whereas today the exact same thing would be phrased Glorie eternă poporului victorios, which is much more recognizable to many non-Romanian speakers. I will note here that popor, people or nation, could actually be a word that survived in the language since ancient Roman times. What is clear in any case is that it has very slowly come to replace the word nam, at least in the official language, since around the Second World War. Let's look at some more examples. Here is an oversight of some Romanian words of non-Latin, mostly Slavic origin, with their more modern Latin alternatives, which again are much more familiar to the Western European ear, and most of which don't even need translation. Biruință, izbândă, victorie, slavă, glorie, veșnic, etern, isprăvit, terminat, veac, secol, slobozie, libertate, dezrobire, eliberare, duh, spirit, jertfă, sacrificiu, nădejde, speranță. Sometimes the meaning of older non-Latin words shifted over time, or perhaps better said, was downgraded, like uliță, a Slavic word for street, started to mean a small back alley, while the Italian-derived strada became the regular word for street. Similarly, the French-based quartier replaced Turkish mahalle as the regular term for neighborhood, while the latter started meaning slum or ghetto. In many other cases, a new Romance word has gained dominance only in writing, while its older non-Romance alternative remains dominant in the spoken language. For the verb to use, most people say apholosy, of Greek origin, but in texts like product packages, instruction manuals, work contracts, or newspapers, the French-borrowed verb a utiliza is nearly always preferred. The same counts for pungă instead of sacoșă, a pregăti instead of a prepara, a omorî instead of a ucide, a dovedi instead of a atesta. New adjectives in the language are also shaped after loaned or reconstructed Latin nouns, or just directly imported from French or Italian, sometimes even if an original Latin-derived noun already existed in Romanian, like in the case of timp, which means time, but if you want to say temporary, you don't say timporar, you say temporar. The same counts for apă, which means water, but if you want to say aquatic, you say just simply aquatic. Părinte, which is parent, but the adjective is parental. Împărat, which means emperor, but the adjective is imperial. Om, which means man, but the adjective is uman. Although, for these last three, an older adjective also exists, but these are again less common in the written language. Respectively, părintesc, împărătesc, omenesc. There are also Latinization attempts for specific words that simply failed. Amic, camarad, and amor are in the dictionary, but scarcely used. They never managed to outcompete the Slavic forms, prieten, tovarăș, iubire, or dragoste. Some more examples of basic everyday Romanian words that remain non-Latin until this day are thought, city, and work, gând, oraș, muncă, from Hungarian, road and box, drum, cutie, from Greek, and the verbs to must, to need, and to read, a trebui, a nevoi, a citi, again from Slavic. Even the Romanian word for yes, da, is as Slavic as it gets. Looking at all these facts, 80% non-Latin lexicon during the 19th century, and the use of many non-Latin words in daily life for the most basic things even today, while the formal written language is almost purely Latin derived. One might be tempted to ask, is Romanian an artificial Romance language? To that I would respond with a categoric nu, and I will explain why. English, the language I'm speaking right now, is considered a Germanic language, even though only around 26%, so 1 in 4 English words, is derived from Germanic tongues, like those of the Anglo-Saxons. That quarter, however, consists of the most important and most basic English words, and something very similar applies to Latin and Romanian. In fact, the percentage of Romanian words directly inherited from Vulgar Latin is said to be about the same as in the Western Romance languages. One important difference, however, is the fact that the Western Romance languages borrowed a lot of words from each other as neighbors, thus from other Romance languages, while in Romanian, the Latin island in the Slavic Sea, borrowing happened much more often from its own neighborhood. Nevertheless, the fact remains that the core of the Romanian language, the major part of its most used and most fundamental vocabulary, is inherited directly from the language of the Roman Empire. Numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, body parts, days of the week, colors, farm animals, directions and prepositions, elementary verbs like to be, to have, to do, to go, to speak, to know, to want, to eat, to sleep, etc. Basic nouns like man, woman, child, day, night, land, country, house, village, yes, even the name of the people and the language itself comes from Latin. There are even some Latin words that disappeared in all the other Romance languages and were only preserved by Romanian, like the color white, albă, or the word for village, sat. As we have seen, Romanian shares a lot of words with French, but overall I would say the language is closest to Italian. But then there are also some words that resemble Iberian languages like Spanish and Portuguese, like the word frumos, or the dialect word for woman, mujer. Also when it comes to sound, Romanian shares a lot of similarities with Portuguese, like for example, where in other Romance languages one hears an O sound, Portuguese and Romanian turn it into an U sound. Actually, the phonetic similarities between Portuguese and Romanian are numerous, but I think that's for another discussion. And finally, when it comes to grammar, Romanian is actually the most similar language to ancient Latin. It preserved the neutral gender, which has disappeared from all the other Romance languages. It either preserved or reintroduced the vocative case, and it preserved the other cases with noun inflections, like the genitive and dative case. Even the sentence at the beginning of this video, although entirely comprised of words of non-Latin roots, all the little bits of grammar and suffixes have a Latin origin. As we discussed, the word muncă, work, comes from Hungarian, but only with a so-called agentive suffix, derived from Latin, you turn it into worker, muncitor. Then you add the article to make it the worker, muncitorul, an article which is pasted to the end of the word as a suffix, which is again similar to Latin, and does not exist anymore in other Romance languages, where the article is separate from the noun, la maison, el paradiso. And with this verb, although the root of it is Slavic, the suffix, which indicates the third person singular, is also Latin. And to wrap it up, the word oraș, city, is derived from Hungarian. But here again, we see the article suffix ul pasted to the word, making it the city. And we see ui, which indicates the genitive case, which I just discussed. So where in other Romance languages one would say de la cité, de la città, in Romanian, of the city is comprised in one single word, orașului, showing again the grammatical similarity with the Latin noun case system. Once more, thank you for your attention. La rivedere.